Hello, everybody. Grant Hunter here with another Product Growth Leaders topic of the week. Steve, you know the engagement I've been working this week, where we're working with a client to try to figure out how do we build a product review process, right? They had a really good stage gate new product introduction process. And it's like once something got through that process, it was like out into the ether. And so they've got products out there that they've built, they've invested in. The board's now going, what's going on with the thing? It's not hitting the targets, but they had no process to do it. And so these conversations really led me into this place to start talking about how do we start thinking about this type of stuff. So we're going to talk about product reviews. Hold on one second. I'm having a product review cycles. And Steve, what's the advice you'd give to people you're talking about, just the importance of or not importance of product reviews?
Well, as an advocate of the court's open framework, I say learning happens at every step, not after it's into the wild.
And so at every step, we have to have some way that we are looking at things and figuring out where they may go.
And it's frustrating when, the product owners are told or the product managers are told you can't talk to customers, because at every step of the way, we need to be able to say, hey, we're building this thing. We're thinking it's going to look like this. Love to get some feedback. But if I have to go through legal and sales and support and services and the weatherman to get that, they're like, well, forget it. It's just too hard, which is why some teams advocate what's called hallway testing. You walk into the hallway and grab the first person who's not on your team and say, what do you think of this?
Yeah. And at some point we need to take all that input we're getting and make decisions about the product and where we're going. So on Monday, I put and I'll admit from my conversation with somebody on this call, probably not the most succinct question into the community. What's your preferred approach to reviewing product performance and adjusting plans or strategy? QBRs, annual planning, long range planning, those types of things. I've heard people talk about, you don't need this anymore if we're agile, right? We're doing continual, so how do we do it? But all of a sudden, I feel like that could get us into, going down the wrong way.
Yeah, but they don't.
Yeah, true.
They say they do, but they don't.
Paul Hatala, God, we have to get him back on the call. He had a great thing. His organization has not done a great job of tying together product performance and strategy. At best, new products reported monthly until reaching an ROI. His preferred approach for new products was a monthly update against hypotheses, which I love. Winning price, actual realized margin, units, accounts, and where we were surprised or to win or lose, because that's going to factor into that. May, you talked about things you guys are doing today. Simple product performance report on a monthly basis, OKRs. Talk to me about how you guys are taking on this idea of reviewing the products, and are they fulfilling what we were expecting them to? Are our assumptions right? Those types of things.
So it goes back to what is a product, because it depends, right? Like, what are you tracking against and why are you doing it? Are you doing it to report to the board overall? Like, that sounds like a dashboard can do that, right? Are you doing it to say, where can we go with our products? What should we be focusing on? What are independent PMs focusing on and why? What are the targets that they think we could meet? Right? What are reasonable assumptions and reasonable targets that we think we could meet with the work that we are doing, so we can show that the work we are doing has an impact, right? Yeah. So that's the approach we're taking to OKRs. So we do this one thing called a monthly intention mapping, key results and intention mapping. So you've got your objectives, you got your KRs, and then what we ask our PMs to do is just project out a little bit to say, like, because you have a pretty good idea of what you're going to do next, generally speaking. It could change, that's fine. But like, what you're going to do next, right? Like what you're doing now to get to maybe that next block of impact that you can hit. So we asked them to project out a couple months, and like it might be from sales having a new bunch of sites available, whatever it might be. And so, yeah, like we look at that, we get people to talk about it, we tell stories around that, and we share it with the much larger audience. It's not necessarily like an executive review, it's actually more for the larger team. So we can come back and say, hey, like, look at what we're doing. I know you're just coding, but like, here's the reality of what's happening. So and then the executives are invited to come and see if they're actually curious. And otherwise, you could just look at a dashboard.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, I love the part about the executives being invited. Chris Butler, who's been in our community and done some stuff with the Product Ops Alliance with us. He had just posted, I don't know today, yesterday, because you never know with the timeline feed on LinkedIn when it was actually posted, but asking a question about how do you fill in a cascade, like in an organization, you got that cascading strategy down. How do you get that feedback to roll back up? And I think that a product review like this, where executives are invited to start learning what's going on, with this is an interesting way to get executives sort of access to that type of feedback.
But it's not a review, right?
Okay.
It is a here's
Conversation.
the fact. Here are the stories that we're hearing from the market. We bring in people who are talking to the customers who've actually experienced this. We bring people in to tell those stories. So we're no longer telling stories third hand, right? So that's like
Yeah.
a very recent change we did, and it's coming along really well. We actually bring in our like sales leads to talk about the new customers and their funnels into that meeting too now. So it's really interesting how these things are evolving to like shape what is the product. And it's less so a quarterly business review and more this is the current state and our future state.
Well, and I like this idea, and I know Steve and I have been proponents of it, this idea of having these monthly meetings where you're sharing problem stories and personas and helping socialize what might be coming down in the future to make sure you're gaining more context and get people involved. So I sort of love this idea of it being, as you said, both current and future, right? How are we doing on our initiatives now? And what have we learned from that? And where do we see this going? And what do we want you guys to be aware of, and where do we need your insight to help us make sure we're doing it well? That's great. I love that, May. Cory, you said you like the short, medium, far strategy, one for 12 week or 30, 90, 180 days. Talk to me about, and obviously it depends on the cycles of your business and your customers. Talk to me about how you look at this.
So the first thing is, how often are people using your product? Is this a TurboTax thing and they use it once, maybe 4 times a year? Is this Outlook or Salesforce and they're in it all day doing things with it? So that kind of determines a lot of stuff for me. The other thing that determines a lot of things for me is how often you're changing the product. So if you're only changing the product once every 6 months, measuring it every week, what are you measuring? So a lot of that comes into play, but I do like the notion of what changed today. And we're looking at trends, we're looking at patterns, we're looking at all those things of, today did something change in the last week or last month, however you want to do it, last quarter, whatever, did that change? And how is that helping us get toward whatever KR we have or number that we're trying to achieve? But I do think that the usage of the application has to be taken into account, and a lot of people don't, and they're measuring wrong things anyway. But just measuring how your product's being used, measuring how that is fitting into your strategy. And I like the notion that May brought up, which is what are the stories that people are telling. So if we're looking at the last quarter, yes, what did the data tell us? How many people did this thing that we wanted to do? But what is some of the interesting stories that we've heard in the last quarter? What's the most impactful story that we've heard in the last quarter? And how can we use that for future marketing? Maybe there's a product improvement in there. Maybe there's a story of a market that we don't know about that's interesting that we need to pursue.
Yeah. I
Go
just
ahead,
want to add to that. One of my PM's favorite words is, or favorite sayings is, the data is there for you to tell that story.
Which, Steve, makes me think about your talk track on when you're presenting that story, when you're presenting a business case, you need to be able to talk to 3 different types. What are they?
Salespeople like stories, finance people like formulas or process. And the third one is, and developers like data.
Yeah. And so to that point, May, if you can weave those things in, and this is the way I remember learning this approach, which was from content Steve had created way back when. It was first you start with a anecdote, right? Let me tell you how we saw this opportunity, or what happened. We talked to a customer and they told us this. So we went through a process to learn more about it. And here's the data we got from it. And if we walk people through that, you're sort of checking the boxes for the different people. But I like how you brought that out, because I think data and stories together, it's not just data, and it's not just stories. It's where they come together that you can really make the impact on this. Calvin, talk to me about your side. The approach really depends on what we're looking to measure and how quickly. So talk to me where you're going.
Yeah, I mean, I looked, first of all, I had a challenge with the question, and especially with the word preferred, because I looked back and I thought, well, the companies I've worked for, we didn't necessarily have ways to track this strategically. There was some,
well, I guess I'll take, as I said, I did, this is probably one of my more poorly written questions. And I could also say
question you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could also say that nobody has a preferred approach because nobody likes doing it.
Yeah, I think the challenge is that in the last couple of companies I work with, we haven't done a good job of this.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'd like to see a QBR, but I'm also struggling with, in my role, what are the metrics we should be looking at? Because like in the previous company, we looked at, on a project by project basis, more of an operations type of role, but that didn't get us to strategy. So I mean, I struggled with this. I'd like to see a QBR, I guess, so we're kind of on a regular basis, on a monthly basis, staying on track. So I guess that'd be the preferred approach.
It's interesting because and I'll have to dig it out and probably republish it. In a previous life, I wrote a paper on the biggest mistake companies make with annual planning is they try to do strategic planning and annual budgeting in the same process, right? And those two aren't compatible. And so to your point, and it's, the larger you get, there's probably going to be more of a formalized strategic planning, but at some point we do need to take a step back. Literally, I have lived in a world where I came into a product line where people hadn't been paying attention to changes in the market over the past decade. And this was this is like when the internet was just coming around and we were distributing content, right? How do you just sit there with your same strategy from 1992 and have that in 2022, right? When everything changes. And at some point, companies don't pay attention to the market. And I see this at tons of places, many clients we work with, many places I've worked, where people lose touch with the market. And at some point, I believe there's got to be a review of the market that's happening. And, I come from a GE background. GE had a very formal session 1 was 3-year plan. Session 2 was 18-month plan. Operating plan was the 12-month plan. And then you went through that process. But that was more on the strategic side. I don't think we did as good a job on the ongoing stuff. Cory, talk to me about your hand in skeptical face.
So there was a couple things there that I was reacting to, and I probably shouldn't.
Why shouldn't you?
Drugs are good. The notion that your strategy, that if your strategy is good, it doesn't matter how it's built. It's kind of one of these things where if you can describe the job that you're trying to get done using 18th century language, it's still a valid job, right? If your job involves using technology, then that's not really the job. The job is something else that they use technology for, or a product
Yeah.
for, or something else. You're trying to get something done. And I think the same might be true of a strategy, which is if the strategy is good enough, it doesn't matter whether it was written in the 90s or the 2000s or the 2020s.
Well, and so we're doing our count point. Jane, you ignorant Noah. I look at this and I say, a strategy should be one of the things that, so let's go Richard Rummel, good strategy, bad strategy. The good strategy kernel is it's got a diagnosis of the current situation. It's got an overriding policy, guiding principles for what we're doing, setting sort of the playing field. And it's got a set of coherent actions. And so as I look at that, the strategy is only as good as the diagnosis. And if things have changed in the market and you haven't changed your strategy to adapt to that, right? It could be that you're in a market that hasn't had seismic changes or whatever it may be. And a strategy could last for 10 years or 20 years, right? In that situation. But in a more dynamic market where things are changing and new products are coming in and innovators are trying to disrupt, things change. I always used to say that the market's moving to you always want to be the upper right box and the market's moving to the right and up, right? So if you were the upper right corner where you want to be, eventually you're the lower left corner because the market.
Yeah, but I think Cory's point is we're in the business of cutting down trees. And 150 years ago, that meant a handsaw.
Yep.
And then it became a chainsaw. And I don't know what it is now, some helicopter swooping down and cutting everything or whatever. But the technology has changed, but the goal of, we're in the tree cutting business has not changed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to highlight from Calvin's answer was both the internal and the external product data and stories, because as much as it is important to have good customer data and stories and things like that, I think the internal story, how are our teams doing? How are we delivering? How is that being seen? Are we on pace? Are we burning money on some instances where we shouldn't? Or is there a way we could reduce cost on something? It is that important. But those internal and external things, I think, are both good stories to tell at the company level.
Yes, and I think for any current situation diagnosis, as I was talking about, you need to be looking internally and externally to understand what's going on and where it can go. I'll jump in. I didn't answer in the forum, but the way I look at it, I try to, and you have to be a big enough company to have, but I like this idea of an annual deep dive where you may be reviewing a little more on the strategy and going out to the customers a little more, and competition and financials, and aligning that with whatever the strategy is from the company, because we need to have alignment from there. But then I like quarterly reviews to look at the initiatives. So in our whatever we do in that deep dive, we're going to come out with product initiatives that we will put OKRs around, and we can monitor the OKRs through the dashboards, weekly, monthly, whatever. But I like having a meeting every quarter or so where we can talk about the initiatives. We can talk about how our key results are tracking. Are we doing well or not? What have we learned? Here's the biggest one that I never see anybody do. We made this decision to do this based on this assumption or hypothesis. And once we've gone to market, we've realized we were wrong. Let's stop doing it, right? Too often, once people made the decision, they forget about their hypotheses and assumptions they made it on, and they aren't willing to stop or change. And so the quarterly gives you the chance to review those, recommit to what you want to do, and move forward. I admit I'm
bias.
What?
The self-serving bias. I was right all along.
Yeah, so our cognitive biases are key. And so that's sort of how I like to do it, and we can recommit stuff. That being said, every business cycle is different. So it may not be quarterly. It may be, for the logging business, maybe it's an annual QBR with an every 3-year deep dive, right? Whatever it may be. But I think you need to find the cycle. And that being said, if there's a major disruption in the industry or the world, like COVID or World War III, that could impact you externally, that may impact the market. We need to look at those things too. Somebody was raising their hand, Calvin.
I was, yeah, and I think you hit about on it toward the end of what you're saying, and that, I mean, I thought about how a quarterly might not work or it might not work as well as we'd like for products that take 18 months to deliver. It's like you have these incremental changes, it becomes a JIRA exercise. Well, we did, these are the things that need to get done, and these are the things that we did. And that's not necessarily a strategy, but it's just more IT operations.
If you've got a product that takes 18 months to deliver, you're not getting product metrics, you're getting process metrics.
Yeah.
We're watermelon status, right? We're green on the outside, red on the inside, and nobody knows.
I've never heard that one.
I haven't either.
I love that.
Yeah. And that's where I see a lot of companies get into bad product strategy and product evaluation, because they're not measuring the product. They're measuring the teams that are trying to produce the products that are stuck in development and process hell, because it takes them 18 months to deliver this big, huge thing.
Well, I think that's the other thing that I've seen with clients is often, and this is why everybody talks about shifting from outputs to outcomes. What they're measuring is checking the box, did we do this? Versus what was the outcome we were expecting? Did we expect this to increase our retention rate or average sale price, our leads created, or whatever? And that's a big mind shift. And that's a place where reviews come in. And we need to figure those things out. Steve, any last thoughts on this before we move to our live poll? Because I was behind and didn't get it done because I was at a client.
I did want to say, it seems to me, my research reveals that the most common development methodology implemented today is Scrum, but it's a little bit Scrum.
One T, not two T's.
Yeah, but it's a little bit Scrum, but we don't do daily stand-ups and we don't do retrospectives, and we do 4-week sprints instead of 2-week sprints. So basically, we're doing agile waterfalls.
Agile fall. I was going to say, right. Agile fall is what I see the most.
And one of the keys to Scrum or Scrum but or Agile is the idea of doing retrospectives. The problem is, to Cory's point, we tend to do process retrospectives. At the end of a sprint, did we do the ceremonies? Did we do the discovery meeting? Did we do the demos? Did we do all the parts of the process? And I think most organizations don't do retrospective on, product metrics. They're looking at process, or they're looking at the people. Why is it that Billy has only written 16 story points this month and everybody else has written 32? That's not what you're talking about, and I see very few companies doing anything other than turning those status meetings, those review meetings, into criticism meetings. I think that's why we pretty much stopped inviting salespeople to demos, because they would come in and say, well, I don't like what you just built. And we're like, well, shut the hell up, stop coming to our meetings, right? But anyway, the other thing I wanted to say was, as you were talking about strategy and timeframes, I guess I may just have to become, the Patrick Lencioni fellow here at Product Growth Leaders, because I was reminded of his book, Death by Meeting. He says the real problem with our meetings is we're always having the wrong one. At the daily check-in, we turn it into a status meeting, or at the weekly tactical meeting, we say, hey, let's rethink everything about our business. It's like a check-in meeting is supposed to be 10 or 15 minutes to say, what is preventing me from succeeding? That's it, that's all. And yet it frequently turns into an hour-long meeting to talk about, why are we building this anyway? Or some other nonsense. And yet we don't have, say, the quarterly offsite where we say, where are we winning? Why are we losing? What new products do we need to succeed going forward?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things we need to do. And, I wonder I think you're spot on with this retrospectives being really process focused. I wonder why that's some of the anti-process stuff we've been seeing from product thought leaders
Could be.
out there is that they're seeing us talk about this. And let's be realistic. And maybe I'm willing, Calvin, to change the word review. I know you didn't like the word, or maybe it was May that didn't like the word review. It was earlier. I'm tired. Retrospective, right, may be a better word, right? And it's not a process retrospective, but it's a product retrospective. Okay,
Yeah.
we made these decisions, right? Let's look at where we've come from then and what was right and what were the assumptions, what have we learned, and what would we do differently now?
But also, I mean, a part of the product retrospective could be a process retrospective, right? It depends on how your organization is structured, because oftentimes when you do a product retro, it's not just, you know, the people building the stuff, it's also the people who gave you the insights to spur that idea and the motivations and the support behind that idea too. So I think process retroing is also important in the space. It's just like, how do we do things better? What did we learn?
Yeah.
Agreed.
I love that. Actually, I wish we had this conversation before I was at my client this week. Because I think some of the things I've taken from it, I could have used as we talked about stuff with them. We're gonna shift to our poll now, and we are doing, because I was lazy and didn't get to poll into the community this week, we are going to be doing a Mentimeter live poll right now. And the question is, where do you see the most value from product reviews? Having a scheduled time to talk about the product, just having time to talk with people about the product, building relationships building relationships with stakeholders, product strategy and initiative decisions that are made as part of it, making senior leadership feel more confident that you're managing the business of the product, or other, it depends. So we can get our votes in. Somebody already voted for having scheduled time. Of course, we're going to go 1-1-1-1, aren't we? I think the last time we did a live poll in Zoom, that's how we did. Oh, okay. Is everybody in?
No.
Why are you not in yet, Calvin?
Hey, I don't know.
You skewed the results, Grant. You're not supposed to say anything until after.
We've got 4 people. It's not statistically significant to begin with. I will put this into the community so we can get the other people's aspect on it. So who's the person who said product strategy and decisions you make? Cory, what made you decide that was the right way? And Calvin, I'm wasting time giving you a chance to process so you can vote for one.
I voted. Did it? Can I come through?
Oh, now it's 2-2. Okay, I see. So Calvin went with you as well. I'll let you, Cory, talk to your thoughts on why this is most valuable.
I mean, it's the time that we actually look at the results, and the results should be interesting. I'm interested
interesting
in
good
results.
or interesting bad?
You tell me, right? We could look at something and say, hey, this new thing we released, it tanked our signups by 20%. We should not do that ever again. Or this new thing that we added caused this other thing to go haywire. Is that interesting or not? Or, hey, we got a mention by some influencer for our new social media site and our signups exploded 1,000 and crashed the site. That would be interesting to know. So I think the more interesting thing is how are the data and stories that we're seeing and hearing aligned to what our strategy is,
and the results we're trying to get
through
that strategy. Okay, I like that, Calvin.
It's kind of where, you know, are we doing what we wanted to do? Are we tracking with where our strategy is going? You know, and you know, if not, we may need to course correct, or maybe the strategy, maybe we look at the same, the strategy's changed. We need to, but I mean, there's just value in being able to look at the strategy and make sure you're going where you expected to.
I'll go back to Steve's example he had a few weeks ago of driving his car to Boston.
Yep.
And ideally, you know which direction you're setting off in. Every once in a while, you want to make sure you're headed in that same direction or you're on track. If you're headed toward Florida and your goal is to go to Boston, you're not going to get there. Or at least it's going to take you a very long time to go all the way around the world that way.
That actually takes me to one of my favorite, do the right things, do things right stories. It's from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, and he talks about this, explorer. That his team is cutting through the forest, and somebody climbs up a tree and yells down, "We're going the wrong way!" And then the person down below goes, "But we're making good time." And I think that, to your point, there's a great, and I'm a strategy guy. I believe that these product strategy initiative decisions we make are at these is where a lot of the value is. Obviously, I think in any of these polls, there's probably in all of the above. I know I don't put them in there, but I think they're could be there. And yes, Calvin, that was a Covey quote, not a. I think I could go into Covey quotes too, not just Drucker quotes.
Okay, I have to drop this in here because you made me think of it, which is Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. The scene where they're driving on the freeway and they're at night and there's a guy yelling at him and he rolled down the window and goes, "You're going the wrong way." He says, "What?" He says, "You're going the wrong way." He says, "That's ridiculous. How does he know which way we're going?"
That was in Planes, Trains, and
Yes, it was.
Automobiles.
They're
You're right.
driving on the opposite side of the freeway. So obviously they're
Right.
going the wrong way, but that's not what they understood. I love that
I hadn't
movie.
seen that movie in years, but I remember that. Yes.
Yeah. All right. May, I'll let you take the lead on having scheduled time to talk about the product, because unbelievably valuable.
I didn't believe this before. I had scheduled time to talk about it, but a regular cadence goes a really long way
Mhm.
because it becomes an expectation across the entire organization that you are going to get this update at this time. And so in a way, it kind of like lessens the noise a lot because it's like, oh, I know this is coming. This is on my calendar. But also, we have a space to talk about it. So we can carve out what we really, really need to talk about if there's been no time, if everyone's super duper busy, or if just like it's a low priority thing, but we need to talk about it. Or maybe it's a high priority thing, but like, it's not top of mind ever. Because like whoever wants to talk about infrastructure improvements, right? So it's
Twitter
important.
Twitter wants to talk about infrastructure improvements.
I'm done with that conversation.
I'm sorry. Well, actually, I see I put this one on. It was first for me because what I've seen is everybody is so busy just doing the day-to-day of it that if you don't have a regularly scheduled time, you don't talk about the product. You don't talk about what we've learned in this, these types of things.
And it's about being intentional, right? Intentional, knowing that within this time period you are going to have a space where you have to talk about your product, and therefore forces you to think about your product and think about what you're going to present and how you're going to present it, but also like while you're doing the work, how are you making that impact so you have something to talk about.
No,
So it's one way holding us accountable, it's holding our partners accountable, but also just like that space to share. And it's been really useful. And for us, it's like twice a quarter. So I really like that cadence.
So I can do this because I'm the host. I'm going to split my vote in half and make this a tie. Steve, your last thoughts.
I just voted when I figured out what May had chosen, and I just copied her vote.
I mean, that's not a bad way to go.
Indeed. But no, I completely agree with everything she said. I mean, we have, if we don't take control of our meetings, if we don't take control of our calendars, it turns into, a mosaic where you don't have enough time to really do anything or think anything. And I know there have been many cases where I've come back to a recurring meeting and they've said, how are you doing on your action items? And I realize I've done nothing except be in meetings since the last time we held this meeting. So, but that said, having a recurring meeting means you've got a deadline. Deadlines are kind of nice. And as you know, those of you who have gone through training with me know, I'd rather ship on schedule no matter what's working, as opposed to wait for everything to be working. So I like deadlines. I like shipping on schedule.
You know, you said you've been in meetings ever since this last meeting, and that's true for this. I've been in meetings ever since we had our last topic of the week call, and you know but it's nice for me to have the deadline because I had to come up with questions.
That's right.
And maybe I need to look at the poll as a deadline. I can do a better job. All right, let's go to our first question.
Wait a minute. Does that mean we get a deadline for when the polls go in the community now? Is it Thursday? What is it, Grant?
I don't know. I'm actually seriously thinking about, it's a Friday poll we do live on here, and then we put it in the community because then I got more time. I'm a procrastinator. When I'm not busy, I'm good at it. It's when I'm busy that I'm not. And here's my. Here,
you make the poll when you write the question and you schedule it to go out on Wednesday.
So did you just hear what I heard? I heard May say, I would like to compose those questions and the poll as a service to you, Grant.
I wouldn't mind, but nobody was going to like it.
I do remember, it was actually exactly a year ago that Brian Weber had stepped up and said, Grant, your polls are terrible. I'm going to write a poll for you. And actually he wrote a really good poll. So maybe there is something to that. And we can
do a little crowdsourcing.
Well, let's be realistic, and then I'll get us back on topic. If I did this not as a real-time thing, if it wasn't like Sunday night, how often, Steve, do you get a text from me on Sunday afternoon or Sunday night saying, how's this for a question tomorrow? Right? If I get ahead of it,
read it and say, well, that's not the way I would have written it, but I don't want to get up out of my chair and go over to a computer and type this, and I don't want to do it thumb typing on my phone. Yeah. So looks great. Go with it.
So yes, there's a better way for us to do this. And May, I agree that it's probably better for us to do this in advance and have the poll questions. When we started it, I was waiting for the responses because people were going to put answers in, and I was going to use those to feed the poll question and answers options, but it really doesn't do that anymore. So May, I will gladly take your help, and maybe we can start building a queue of stuff. And anybody else who wants to, anybody out there listening, watching, whatever, let's open source this creation of questions, topics, and polls. And that would make my life a whole bunch easier.
I am prepared to write the worst poll ever.
I don't know. I got 90 some of them that are going to give you a run for your money. All right.
I can see that poll from May, like the first, what do you think of this? A, other, B, all of the above.
No. It'll be
none.
A. It'll be A, 4 paragraphs, B, 16 paragraphs. I don't have time for this.
She's going to have to put links in every option because the field's not big enough.
References, annotations, notes,
citations. Yeah.
Well, no, I'll openly admit I'm more the references and annotations and citations. That's sort of I've had people say, how much do you read? Because it's like, as I'm talking through the stuff, I reference books, and it's like, I guess I do read a lot or listen a lot. We've talked about that before. All right, we're going to get back to the topic.
Well, there's 5 minutes we can edit out of the recording before we post it.
Never. We're going to need it just to fill the time. So how should product reviews align with other corporate planning cycles, right? Finance has the cycles they run us through. Corporate leadership has the cycles they run stuff through. And if we can think downstream, right, development and other stakeholders have their cycles for stuff. How do we need to align product with the rest of the organization as we do this? Or do we?
Should we at least understand how often they're doing their reviews?
That would be one thing that we should have, how we could do that. So let's start with that. We should understand what their cycles are.
Yeah. And then I guess the other thing is, how much does product feed into that? If it's a large corporation and product is a small part of it, then maybe the sinks that we have isn't as important as the company is the product and everything has to be in lockstep.
Yeah.
See,
Corey, not Corey, Calvin.
In what company is the product? I mean, the product is always the company, is it not? I mean, otherwise, what do you
Ooh,
offer?
that's a good question.
You know, what do you? I mean, if you can give me an example, but I mean, I'd be of the opinion that, you know, the
Okay,
product is
right
what's
now I'm
being
staring
offered.
at a Sony camera. Sony makes cameras. They also make thousands of other things, laptops, cell phones, all kinds of things. So if the product that I'm working on is cameras, and specifically the Sony A7R III, then how much does that tie into the larger Sony profit portfolio?
But it's still a small portion of the bigger
A small
product
portion of the bigger
portfolio.
portion
So it's still, I
versus,
mean, it's still product driven. It's just that it's one product amongst many.
Well,
Yeah.
but in that line, Calvin, you need to think about, and this goes right to this question. If I'm at a larger company that's got multiple portfolios or product lines, what's the cycle look like to make sure that, well, at the corporate level, we need to do some, probably a strategic plan for the board, right? Because boards want that, right? Then feeding into that and out of that, the portfolio or product line people need to do their planning, right? And then that should come down to the product. Where you were going, which I liked, was I believe that, Roger Martin says that the heart of any strategy is where to play and how to win. And that's product strategy. That's market and product strategy, right? And so I believe that, since the only companies are in a business to create a customer, right? There's my Drucker quote. And if that's the case, what we do is everything we do to create revenue is a product. And so I believe that product should be the heart of the strategy that we're doing. But the bigger your company gets, the more products you have, the more portfolios you have, the harder it is to just make it about one product.
I mean, so I mean, if using that example, then if the company has multiple products and multiple portfolios, say using the Sony example, then the product review should follow the corporate planning cycles. But as I think about it, I would see a lot of value in doing QBRs or monthly, where if it's warranted, if it's valuable, if there's a lot of fluctuation from month to month. And by fluctuation, I don't mean JIRA, but if there's if you're selling a consumer product, or even something like FedEx, where it's highly cyclical,
Yeah.
and February is a down month, but around now they're killing it, then there's value in looking at the product on that cyclical, on a regular basis.
And I would say at a minimum, if you have a corporate planning cycle that they go through,
Yeah.
you should be aligning your exercises with that. The client I was with this week, it's like, probably we should do these product strategy deep dives before we do budgeting, right? So we have an idea of what initiatives we think we need and what funding we need for them, so we can look at budgeting and make decisions based on that. So I think there needs to be a interrelation to them, because some of what we do in product strategy and product management is going to be fed from what they decide, and some of it's going to feed into their calculations for budgets and stuff like that. May, what are you thinking besides row 73?
Whatever makes sense. Like, if you are in a large corporation, which I've spent a lot of time in, and the head of whatever arm you're in says, I want blah, I want all of your strategy and all of your planned results by X date, that's what you work with, right?
Yep.
But how you work below that level is entirely up to you and what makes sense for your product.
Yeah, I
like do what makes
completely agree.
sense, right?
It-
Like,
Align your deep dive with when you need to do that for the corporate stuff, and then
yeah.
find the right cadence for check-ins and reviews.
Yeah, and like it depends on you, your stakeholders, like who needs to be there, how much time you're willing to commit to being on the same page, right? Like what is the
Mhm.
value of that? Do you work with a lot of other stakeholders where you need constant alignment, or is it like or do you have an amazing sales team where you just publish new sales enablement training stuff on the portal or whatever, and they're the most amazing sellers and you don't need to align with anything, right?
Yeah.
Like what is it that you need? What is it you're trying to accomplish with a review? I think it's really important to ask that, because like you do reviews. Reviews have all sorts of purposes, but why are you doing it? What is the
Yeah.
purpose?
No, I like that. Steve, any thoughts on, aligning with corporate planning cycles?
Well, I was thinking a number of things, but I'll try and make them brief. I've always found it funny and stupid that organizations book around fiscal year, because December is the worst possible time to start planning 2023. There's all sorts of last minute stuff that is trying to happen while most Americans are taking 2 or 3 weeks off. And I've always kind of admired the companies that had a year end at the end of June instead of the end of December. So that's one thing. But the other thing is I talked to somebody recently regarding, their fiscal planning, and they were basically saying, it's going to take us from early November to end of December to do all of our product plans for the new year. And that just seems silly to me. And I learned something, and I think it was from Dean Leffingwell of Safe fame, who said, the right way to do it. Yeah, I know. I saw that, Cory. He basically says, all I really want from leadership is how much money do I have to spend in product? And then leave me alone. So if we've got a $10 million budget and I get 2 million of that, then leave me alone for a year.
And trust me.
Well, yes, trust me and my team, right? Empower the people. And I feel the same way about marketing. It's like, how important are these different products in the upcoming year? Give me some money. And then we don't have to do all this nonsensical bottom-up spreadsheet nonsense. It's just like, you know what, Cory, we love you. We love your product. We think your product is worth $2 million this year. Here's your $2 million. Please don't go live in Bali with our money. Come back and do your work. But it just seems like we go to all this trouble that is all a waste of time. So I question the need for any sort of fiscal planning of that nature.
We've talked a lot on this in these topic of the week conversations about this idea of how do we push decision making down and atomize it and make it more distributed through transparency and clarity of strategy. And it actually, gets to my next question. I had a couple of qualifiers with if you can achieve self-managed teams, or if you truly can be agile, is it possible to not need periodic reviews? And Cory, I was thinking of you because of your background with agile. And
yes, absolutely. I think it's the key point is not needed. You can still have them, but you don't need it if you're doing it frequently enough, as in every day you're looking at your metrics, you're seeing how they're trending short, long term, medium term towards strategy. If you're having those conversations with your team, with your stakeholders, with other people on the team, you don't need to do it periodically because you're constantly doing it. It's like anything else we do in an agile and lean environment. We're constantly evaluating how we're doing and where we're going, and then we can make changes. We don't have to wait 3 months to go, hey, we're going the wrong way, we should turn. We can turn now. It's okay.
So how do you handle the more market strategic stuff, right? If we're iterating down a certain path, do we at some point need to take a step back and do a more deep dive, you know.
You certainly can, and it's probably a good idea too. Again, that need word is the one I'm keying off of is, do you
I
need to do periodic? No, you don't. If you're working together daily, focusing on the right things, it might be a good idea.
in an
Or
empowered
even more strangely, what if your company actually had a product and market strategy?
I don't know what that
I
would look
think
like,
would be
Steve.
really helpful.
Yeah, what does that look like?
Well, but
Indeed.
you know, and this is a place where I would think that product management should be helping do that. And so at some point we need to take that forest view for the trees, right? If we're down in the trees going, at some point we need to step back. Can we do that without a formal review? You know, that's the question. I keep pushing this idea of distributing decisions and pushing things to the edge and atomizing it and that type of stuff. Yet I'm not sure, because that's almost a, you know, utopian type unicorn or whatever it may be. I don't know. May, I'd love to get your take on this.
What if we replace the word product reviews with discussions on strategic direction, or like reviews on strategy? I feel like product reviews is like, it happens at a smaller team level. At a bigger team level, it's like you want to do a share out, but it's more of a share out. Here's the status updates. Here's what's worked. Here's what hasn't worked. Like, it's much less of a QBR in like the way we think about a QBR. It's more like, you know, here is the status. Here's reality, based on what we know. You know, I think those are needed. And we also need to review our strategy, and that's a different bucket, but based on these learnings. And then there's also the team things that Cory's talking about. But like, does it all live together in one disgusting ceremony?
I like you breaking out sort of the more strategic. I mean, you've built, Cory talked earlier about, you know, longer range, mid range, short range, and I think that you just sort of talked about that as well. Calvin, any last thoughts before we go to our lightning round?
No, I mean, I'm leaning toward what Cory said earlier. You know, that there's periodic reviews, then they may not be needed as often. The only question I would have would be, if your peers are talking about it at the senior VP level, you know, senior product managers are talking about it, does that information, you know, flow up to the senior VP level, so he or she gets it as well and is on board?
And that's part of, you know, we talk about the reviews, and this is actually probably leading into the next question, right? How much of the value of this is for the decision making versus as a communication upwards to help people know what's going on and give them visibility?
Yeah, that's a good point.
To it. So, and with that said, our lightning round question is, what is your advice to a product leader on the value of regular product reviews? And we can change the word review if we want to, but you know, this regular ceremony, disgusting ceremony, this regular ceremony of, you know, what's the value to doing like periodic product reviews? Cory.
Are you going in the right direction?
Are you going in the right direction? I love that. Calvin.
If you don't have them, don't cry to me when you get blindsided.
Is that a CYA answer?
I hadn't thought of it that way.
So don't complain if you get blindsided if you're not doing these with us. Okay, I'll take that, May.
Yeah.
Go back to the purpose of this meeting and allow it to evolve.
Ooh, I like this.
That's what I did the last year.
So don't overly prescribe it. Let it become what it needs to be.
Let's try it.
I like that a lot. Steve.
Business-oriented product managers do this continuously.
They do. The value, I'm going to say, is the conversations you have about the stories, the assumptions, what we've learned, and how does that change or impact to sort of yes and with Cory, but do we need to change direction? Are there decisions we made that we now look at that were wrong, and do we need to pivot? Or are there new things that we weren't aware of that could bring something else? That was my longest answer ever, I think, for topic of the week, even in the Thunder rounds. So guys, this has been very clarifying for me, very helpful. I mean, as I've been working with some clients on this, I've written about this, and I think it's something that, you know, in this world of trying to push everything to agile in this type of stuff, I think sometimes we lose focus on the forest for the trees. And, you know, this is, to me, this conversation is about how do we make sure we keep having that type of stuff. I learned a ton. I learned about watermelons, you know, green on the outside, red on the inside. And it made total sense. That's, I think, why we all reacted. And, you know, again, every week on these conversations, I learn, I get new ideas. It pushes me to think and stretch and go. And I want to thank you guys for that. So Cory, Calvin, May, my partner, Steve, thank you for a wonderful conversation. We do this every week. Monday, the question goes in. Wednesday, 80% of the time, the poll goes in. We're going to fix that. Fridays, we have these wonderful conversations. Thanks, everybody, for the great conversation. We'll see you next week in the community. Have a great weekend, everybody.